website. And could I ask IT colleagues to start the recording? First of all, I'll call for the sediment and any apologies. Christy.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and morning, members. So we have Councillor Douglas Reid.
Yeah.
Councillor Jim McMahon is going to be a wee bit late this morning. Councillor John McFadden. No. Councillor Elaine Cowan. Here. Councillor Maureen Mackay. Present. Councillor Ian Linton.
Here.
Councillor Graham Barton.
Here.
Councillor Barry Douglas.
Here.
Councillor Neil Ingram.
Here.
Councillor Claire Maitland. Here. Councillor Drew Filson.
Here.
Dr David Lewis.
Here.
Claire McKellar.
Here.
Babs Mowat.
I'm here.
And I have an apology from Norman Watt. Jackie Livingston.
I'm here.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, just before we start the business, a couple of short announcements. First of all, to welcome Claire McKellar as the substitute religious representative to our first meeting of the Cabinet. Claire replaces Harriet Johnson, who, as members are aware, is currently on parental leave. Also, at the back, we have Christopher Wells. You might not know Christopher, but you'll know his dad, Liam, who's one of our drug and alcohol coordinators. Christopher's here for 2 weeks working with legals, and is currently studying law at Stirling Uni. And welcome, Christopher. Okay, that in mind, just go to the business side. Item 2E is the appointment of temporary replacement for the third church representative to serve in the council. Oh, sorry, I missed the declaration answers. You're right enough, Christine. Sorry. Do have any declarations answers?
Thank you, Chair. In respect to item 7, I'm just letting members know for transparency, I'm a trustee of Celebrate Kilmarnock, but which is in the paper as Kilmarnock Town Centre Partnership, but I don't consider it significant that I need to withdraw.
Thanks. Thanks for reminding us, Elaine. I'll declare the same declaration in terms of Celebrate Kilmarnock, and I know in receipt of the 2 of the place in terms of the place-based investment programme. I'm a member of St Andrews and St Margaret's Church, which is connected to the Howard Centre and the Well, and I'll declare an interest, but not just in terms of transparency. Any others? Okay, thanks for that, members. We'll just go into the report. Just as I was saying earlier, the item 2E, appointment of temporary replacement for the third church representative to serve the council's decision-making structure in respect of educational business. David.
You've probably already covered this in your introductory remarks. As members are aware, each of the churches are allowed to or invited to appoint a representative for education business. Church of Scotland recently had, and then the representative, as you've said, is currently on parental leave, and best wishes to them. And the invite was extended to afford or to tender a substitute for that period so that there was continuity of representation, which they have done. The report's simply for noting here. And the technicality is that while it's in the gift of the church to make the nomination, it's always technically council that needs to confirm the appointment, which is purely a formality. So that will be flagged up in a minute, and we can square the circle at the next council meeting. But it is only a temporary appointment for the duration of the parental leave. So it is a bit of a formality, but there's not much we can do about that because it's built into the legislation. But that's all there is to that one. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, thanks, David. Okay, members note that. Going to the rest of the business, and that's a regular item. That's East Ayrshire Performance Summary Report. And to commence that and give an overview is Joe McLaughlin.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. This is the East Ayrshire Performance Report for 2022-23 financial year. And I'm grateful to members and to group leaders for meeting with me prior to today to go through the report. Paragraph 7 of the report notes that the Council ended the year with a surplus of around £3.7 million, made up from a number of areas. The largest element was staff cost underspend as a result of industrial action during the year. And as members know, when industrial action takes place, then service budgets are reduced by an amount equal to the amount of pay that's no longer required to be paid, with these funds taken centrally and held by the council. The surplus has also been created because we ended the year with lower than anticipated insurance costs due to the long-standing and successful relationship the council has with our provider Zurich. This was also helped by the proactive work undertaken throughout the year by the insurance team and by our colleagues in health and safety in the work they do to manage our risks throughout the year. The underspend in insurance was around £400,000, but members, you know that at the last Cabinet, you gave approval for a negotiated contract to begin with Zurich for the next 5 years, and that report noted early indications that would suggest that our insurance premiums are likely to rise going forward, given the pressures in the insurance and the financial markets. We also ended the year with lower than anticipated historic pension costs, a budget held centrally to meet the costs of previous retirements. Our council tax income was also over-recovered by around £500,000 due to a range of factors, new houses, increased yield, and also from the small elements of payments of the council tax report support that was provided to households throughout the year. Finally, members, the reprofiling of the council's capital programme in November meant that our planned borrowing costs ended the year lower than anticipated by around £800,000. But because this is due to timing, then this amount is added into the capital fund to help meet those debt charges in future years. Members, throughout the years, I highlighted the sustained pressure that service budgets were experiencing from the pandemic, from increased inflation rates and from other pressures associated with the general cost of living. At 31st of March, there were 4 of our services that were in an overspend position. Our reserve strategy means that when a service underspends, it carries that underspend gain into its following year's budget. However, where a service overspends at the year end, then that overspend is taken forward and becomes the first hit against the next year's budget. Members, you know that the pressures that service budgets experienced in 2022-23 will continue and indeed are likely to worsen in the coming year. We also know that as council, you set a balanced budget for 2023-24 without the need to use our reserves. And so paragraph 8 of the report before you asks for your approval to reallocate the end of year surplus to specific services so that wherever possible, we're able to remove that overspend hit against the 23-24 service budget, enabling these services to go through the year with a full unadjusted budget. In the paragraphs and tables that follow, the figures assume that approval has been given, and as such, the figures have been updated accordingly. The table at paragraph 9 provides a summary of the year-end position and highlights that the remaining amount of the surplus, around £700,000, be added to our uncommitted balance in order to provide members and Cabinet with scope and flexibility going forward. Paragraph 10 also notes the transfers made in year from the Renewals and Repairs Fund as part of the budget setting process and seeks approval to add £500,000 back into that fund. Member service information begins on paragraph 13, where we see that for education, after taking account of the initial overspend and the carry forward for Pupil Equity Fund and for schools, then education ends the year £2.2 million overspent. And the table at this paragraph notes the budget transfer of £1.028 million, essentially paying back the staff cost savings due to industrial action, leaving a net overspend position of £1.1 million, which is predominantly due to overspends in early years. Members, you'll be aware that I've highlighted the early years overspend position throughout the year, and I've also highlighted the work that colleagues in education and in finance and ICT have and continue to undertake to bring the budget back online. Further work is required to support the move to a balanced budget and to a break-even position. And hopefully by the next D-Stage Performance Report, we'll be in a better position to tell you that that budget is now on a balanced and a secure footing. Within communities and economy, services ended the year collectively with underspends of £500,000, but this underspends itself masked a range of significant financial challenges that those services faced during the year. Indeed, Ayrshire Roads Alliance, Facilities and Property Management and Housing and Communities all ended the year in an overspend position, noting the challenges that they faced, predominantly through inflation and additional costs. It also notes the proposed budget transfers in the table at paragraph 15, totalling £541,000. Moreover, in paragraph 16, we note that Cabinet in June 2021 agreed to fund financial support to the Kilmarnock Leisure Centre Trust from community and economy balances. However, members, in order to support services going forward, it's proposed that this financial support is taken from the in-year surplus rather than from housing and communities balances. This means that the overall community and economy services will end the year £1.2 million underspent, and this total amount will be required to be earmarked to meet existing commitments. Paragraph 18 notes the end-of-year position in respect of wellbeing and highlights an end-of-year underspend of around £1.8 million. Members, as I've highlighted throughout the year, our social care services are facing unprecedented challenges. And indeed, that end-of-year underspend position was only achieved after the service had used £3.6 million of COVID-related reserves. The paragraph highlights the range of financial pressures experienced last year, from sustainability payments for residential care homes, additional costs for non-residential care, significant out-with placement costs, as well as additional staffing costs, all presenting significant challenges. Indeed, had that COVID reserve not been available, then the service would have ended the year overspent by £1.7 million. Members, as the service enters 2023-24, it does so having fully utilised its COVID reserves, and therefore it will be a budget under severe pressure as we go through the year, and we'll learn more about in the next D-Stage Performance Report. In the meantime, however, officers are actively managing that budget. I've also mentioned throughout the year the financial pressures being faced by the housing revenue account. And although the report says that the HRA ended the year £3 million in surplus, that again masked a range of challenges and works that the officers would like to progress in terms of the housing improvement programme that were delayed. And so all of this surplus will be carried forward and retained by the HRA for future commitments. At paragraph 23, I note the Scottish Welfare Fund and recognise as a council we have sought to maintain the eligibility criteria for both crisis grants and community care grants at the lowest possible level, meaning that those who apply for the grants would, if conditions were met, likely receive an award. The annual budget from Scottish Government for the Scottish Welfare Fund is £1 million. And in the last year or so, we've sought to bolster that by adding funding from balances within finance and ICT. In a sign of just how challenging it is for our residents, I have to inform Cabinet that around a quarter of that core £1 million budget for this year has already been spent in the first 8 weeks. And as a council, we are required under the Scottish Welfare Fund guidance to take steps that ensures that this budget lasts the financial year. The tools to do that are fairly blunt and lead to the introduction of stricter eligibility criteria by moving from a low eligibility rating to a medium or indeed a high rating. Members, unfortunately, I have taken steps to maintain crisis grant eligibility and community care grant eligibility for the year. I'd maintained crisis grant eligibility at low, but I have had to move eligibility for community care grants to medium, which will essentially limit the amount or the value of any award that is made. Members, in the later section of the accompanying report, you will note that a balance of around £300,000 remains unallocated within the cost of living funds. And it's likely to be the case that I will ask for your approval to utilise that for Scottish Welfare Fund this year. But I will be in a position to update you on that in the next D-Stage Performance Report. In the meantime, we'll use core budget as well as any funds from finance and ICT to maintain those levels at low and medium till then. Members, the end of year D-Stage Performance Report also provides details of any authorisation sought under the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act 2000. And paragraph 28 notes that there was no such authorisations made between the 1st of January 22 and the 31st of December. Paragraph 29 provides details of a Supreme Court case relating to annual leave entitlement for workers working less than 52 weeks a year. It provides details of a collective grievance that's been lodged with the Council. Colleagues and People in Culture have reviewed the annual leave entitlement for term time workers and, whilst this calculation is correct, due to the method of rounding used and to ensure full compliance, then the term time calculation has been updated by the Council. The cost of this on a recurring basis is £40,000, but a two-year back date will also be paid, with the backdated element being met from central balances. Finally, member, paragraph 40 notes that a new corporate risk has been added to our risk register. An amber risk relating to the cost increases are related to the Ayrshire Growth Deal capital projects, and as members would expect, work is underway to estimate the impact on projects and, more importantly, the resultant benefits realisation outcomes for our projects within the deal. Chair, I'm conscious that's a fair bit of information to Cabinet. I hope it gives members the assurance that in terms of the year end, the work that's been done by officers, supported by members both at budget and throughout the year, means that we have tried to balance year end budgets to mean making sure that services as they go forward do so with a full budget for 2023-24. I'm happy to stop there and take questions.
Thanks, Joe. Could I be asked in terms of paragraph 24? It's really one worrying statistic that you've got there in terms of spent a quarter of our budget in the first 8 weeks. By my calculations, we'll have spent the money before Christmas. We've got 20 weeks worth of to go be spent. Is there anything else? But it's good to see we've got the possibility of the 300,000 that you mentioned. But is there anything else we can do to augment that or support that in any other way?
Through you, Chair. Sadly, by me increasing the eligibility for community care grants to medium, that will slow the rate of spend. And it's blunt, as I said, and it's fairly brutal, but that's what it will do. So that will make it last a bit longer. At the same time, we've got funds in our balances that can be used to support that. So not using uncommitted balances, using finance and ICT. But there's a wider question here about the whole purpose of Scottish Welfare Fund. We have, as a council, and certainly myself and colleagues in finance and ICT, have been discussing with government the purpose of Scottish Welfare Fund. It's a fund steeped in primary and secondary legislation, so trying to make changes is really difficult. But we're saying that there's better ways of doing this. There's better ways to let councils locally determine who needs help best. And so the sort of conditions and guidance and handcuffs that accompany it can be unwieldy at times, and there's better ways of doing it. The good news is that Scottish Government has undertaken a review of Scottish Welfare Fund. I'm not sure there'll be any more funding, if I'm honest, with Cabinet. I think, in fact, it'll be down to us to try and support those who need our help most. And certainly, that's a shock statistic to me that we've spent a quarter of the budget in 8 weeks. The normal knee-jerk thing to do would be to close the door. But we know from the report that Joe will give and the report that we've given throughout the year in terms of cost of living, that that's not the thing to do. So we'll find other funds from finance and ICT beforehand, but I put a marker down today that I may come back at September to ask for the remnants of the cost of living money to be set aside as well. We've seen this last year in terms of the Scottish Welfare Fund. We'll see it this year. It's testament to the caring East Ayrshire Council that people will come to us when they need support. So the expectation has certainly risen, and it's a budget I'll keep a close eye on, and I'll keep members briefed. But I think in all reality, it'll be down to us to try and sort.
Thanks very much, Joe. It's really quite concerning, but it's an issue we'll come back to throughout the year. Anybody else? Any comments or questions? Maureen?
Thanks very much, Joe. I suppose if we just stick with that, perhaps, first of all, Joe, we've had some conversations, and I know that changing the eligibility criteria from low to medium, we've discussed it means people will still get white goods, people will still get beds, but all of the bits and pieces effectively that make a home, there is not going to be funding under that new eligibility criteria for. So again, it's about what advice and supports additional are we able to give people to direct them, because we are very fortunate across East Ayrshire that there are lots of charitable outlets. And again, you know, part of our agenda is about greener and recycling. So lots of these goods are available for people to be able to uptake and recycling. So can I have an assurance that people are not merely going to be told that's all you're getting, but actually there are going to be ongoing supports to give people the assistance they require? I know that it came to my attention last year that I had a family who went over 2 winters with no carpeting in one of their children's rooms. That's certainly not a set of circumstances that we would want to know was repeated. So what are the opportunities that we have to ensure that it's not? So if I could take that as a first question, but Leader, if you can indulge me to come back. Thank you.
And through you, Chair, you're absolutely right. The tools to bring it back online are fairly blunt. By moving community care, you wouldn't necessarily move crisis grants first, because the very nature of crisis grants is an immediate crisis that needs resolution, and the timescales to turn those applications around are very short. It's 15 days to turn around a community care grant application. That's someone who is maybe setting up home for the first time, fleeing violence, leaving residential care, or leaving criminal justice settings. By moving that to medium, you know, the first thing I do is I go and talk to the head of housing and communities, because it's their tenants that apply for these grants too. So it's about thinking and linking of seeing that knock-on effect. It's easy for me to make a judgment in finance and ICT, but I know it causes a ripple elsewhere. So by speaking to Blair, Blair's aware of that. Blair has additional supports that he can provide as well, and he and I will talk together as we go through this to September to see what the impact of this is. In terms of signposting, you were at the Opera House yesterday, you saw the telephone teams, and they do that. And I'll give you that assurance that they will continue to signpost wherever they can, not just to charitable organisations, but they also signpost and support people who are in crisis. So when individuals call on a crisis, you know, we're not just listening to the issue around, you know, they don't have any money for a week or two. If there are other issues there that require involvement from other services within the council, then we're signposting that too. And we're also very conscious of the work that the health and safety team and David and his staff have done around suicide prevention, and that is also in their remit too. So that they're trying wherever possible to deal with really challenging calls that come into them, you know, to make sure that's the case. So I can give an assurance in terms of that. What I've got to be honest with you about, though, is at low for crisis grants and low for community care grants, it becomes easy. We just incur costs. We just spend the money. I've got to stop that. So I've increased the eligibility criteria for community care grants. It will mean that in some places, some people will get white goods, but they may not get certain other things. That may be at times carpets, I don't know. But we will look at it on a case-by-case basis. And my challenge today is to go away and find some money from my service to try and make that last a bit longer. I don't think this became a pressure in the last few years. It's a continuing pressure, and I've got to be honest, I don't see it, you know, reducing anytime soon. So there's a bigger discussion to take place. We're having that with Scottish Government. I'm having that with the team. We'll speak with members and group leaders individually about this, but it's a real challenge for our service and for the council going forward. But please be assured in terms of that advice and signposting we're doing, but also that discussion with the thinking and linking what's happening elsewhere too is undertaken as well.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you. And I think yesterday we saw various things on our tour when Leader and myself and my deputy were there with Chief Exec. And I think there are potentially things that we saw that, yes, we would like to take up in terms of perhaps some of that recycling, but also to acknowledge the pressures that our staff are under. And I think, you know, if we contrast that with some other organisations that we've had to visit who are taking account of the pressure that staff are under in these very difficult phone calls and looking at welfare facilities and the opportunity for time out facilities for staff, I think is certainly something from what we saw yesterday. And again, with these increasing pressures, which can only increase as the year goes on and as we move from summer back into winter again, we would want, I think, to be mindful of that and look at what's possible to do. If I could turn now to the risk register in relation to the Ayrshire growth deal. Again, I think what I'm looking for as an assurance here is, because the Ayrshire growth deal is just that, it is a pan-Ayrshire aspect. I am assured and I am comfortable because we have the only project that is actually up out of the ground and running within East Ayrshire. At last cabinet, we took decisions which will allow us sensibly to utilise the AMEC project within our Moorfield area. So I am confident that when I look at our projects, we are absolutely on track. I'm looking for some assurances here that our good stewardship of this money to date is not going to be impacted by perhaps some difficulties and challenges that other Ayrshires have. In other words, that there can be no potential poaching into money. So it's just to set out how that money is actually managed and how that money is allocated, Joe, I think would be helpful here, given the circumstances that we know we are under with the growth deal.
Through you, Chair. For my sins, I'm also the accountable officer for the Ayrshire growth deal as well, and for the 16 capital projects and 3 revenue projects. £252 million of government funding, £18 million from South Ayrshire, 14.5 from North Ayrshire and 13.5 from East Ayrshire to make up those projects. For East Ayrshire, Moorfield, AMEC, Halo and Core are our 4 projects that we take forward. And within North and South Ayrshire Council, they have a raft of projects as well. Please be assured that I meet with our team internally every month to go through our 4 projects, our 3 projects really, because as you say, Halo's out the ground and operational. I'm also taking 2 meetings with both UK Government and Scottish Government Civil Service monthly as well, where I take them through the deal and through the project and give them assurance in terms of the composition and the progression of the final business cases for the projects themselves. And in terms of the point that led to the risk being created, I think there's a recognition that in 2019, when we signed the deals, that funding envelope was sufficient, both to meet the aspirations of the deal and, more importantly, to deliver the benefits realisation. You know, that £300 million of additional external funding and 7,000 jobs across Ayrshire. And it's councils now, chief executives and Section 95s now having a discussion around not necessarily just the money, but about the outcomes. We know that in terms of the report that was presented to members in terms of the locating both Moorfield and AMEC on the Moorfield site, that's really successful, and it shows the initiative and innovation that's been used here to try and make the deal work within the envelope. But discussions alongside that also show that with the construction costs that now exist compared to 2019, that it's a real challenge to build what we thought we were going to build in 2019 at today's prices. And so that discussion taking place at a local level and a potential further discussion taking place at a national level, as I'm understood all deals are doing around what can be achieved. So I give an assurance that in terms of the 4 East Ayrshire deals, they are in the programme and they are progressing. But there'll be a need to review the entirety of the deal in terms of cost and also benefits realisation. given the pressures that are being felt, not just in the 16 capital projects, but also generally capital projects across councils, the length and breadth of Scotland. So I hope that gives you assurance that, you know, we're on it. And as accountable officer, I need to be on it, and I'm on it at various times of the months. But that's the latest we have in terms of our 4 projects that feed into those 16 projects overall.
Thanks, Joe. I mean, you're probably aware that there's been some discussion on this at some of the various Pan-Ayrshire forums, and construction inflation continues to be a worry. But I mean, that's firmly, as you say, you know, it's firmly on the risk register collectively. Ed, I don't know if you want to comment any.
I suppose it's just to say, you know, the level of concern from chief executives were such that we asked for specific meetings where Section 95 officers, you know, on the understanding that this could have an impact on benefits realisation. So clearly we're all, you know, looking at the growth deal, we're looking at the jobs that this can deliver across, you know, like Ayrshire, and therefore had asked for that piece of work that has certainly been carried out, and we've seen some evidence of that here in East Ayrshire about how can we still deliver, you know, this growth deal on the assumption for us is that nobody else has given us any more money to do that. That's what we're building on that model. In terms of some of the Pan-Ayrshire, you know, groups that you are aware of, that there are a number of issues around this that then brings us, if we're looking at RAG status, to a red, you know, in terms of that, in terms of being able to deliver some of these projects. And their individual discussions at this stage have to go in between the different parties about how to take, you know, like that forward. But, you know, like, we are really focused on the 2 things. So first of all, on the, you know, the delivery within the East Ayrshire projects and what we can do. And secondly, on a Pan-Ayrshire basis, aligned to the new economic strategy, how do we deliver jobs across Ayrshire? Because some of the projects in North or South Ayrshire can deliver significant job opportunities for people from East Ayrshire. So it's in all our interests to make sure that these projects go ahead, you know, as best that they can. But at this stage, there is no indication or anything that there would be any resource shifted from an East Ayrshire project to any other project. We all recognise that there's just, you know, we're having to change what the look of the project was from 2019 till now, with that real focus on, remember always the purpose of this. The purpose of this was about economic growth. It was about jobs, and, you know, at Ayrshire, how do we make sure we deliver on the purpose? You know, how we do it might be slightly different, but keep focused on the purpose.
Thanks, Eddie.
Then to ask the question in terms of the ARA overspend. Now, members, I'm sure, will remember that a decision was taken that ARA would suspend anything other than emergency. So that would be emergency road repairs for a period of time. And the rationale given for that at the time, I think, was in terms of the difficulty that they had in recruiting personnel in relation to that. So I suppose now that we're in a situation that we have been told that they have overspent simultaneously to a time at which we know that they were actively suspending activity, could I ask for a further explanation of that overspend, please?
Through you, Chair. So on the covering report, Ayrshire Roads Alliance, I think, is a £20,000 of an overspend. You're right. That was what was suspended in terms of certain roads maintenance work, given to give the service opportunity to look at costs of materials and inflationary pressures that we're facing. And at the same time, it's also a budget that has absorbed the significant overspend in terms of primary and secondary transport too. So it's a £20,000 overspend that's being realised because of the suspension of work, but also at the same time and concurrent to that, holding a real pressure in terms of primary and secondary transport. That £500,000, £600,000 overspend that's there. And that's the work that's taking place, and certainly in terms of primary and secondary transport, speaking with colleagues in terms of bringing forward discussions for members at in early course around options for that review of the subsidised element of primary and secondary transport.
Thank you, and I think, as we know, we're waiting some further work done on that. Could I also ask, please, then finally, for this section, the issue in terms of early years, is that something, because we have been incredibly successful with young people and families requesting the access back to work? And I suppose if that's the case, have we seen the paralleled impact then on our employment rates across East Ayrshire?
To you, Chair. There's a number of factors that are impacting on that budget. I think at its basic level, we've got overspends in staffing, overspends in food costs and meals, and overspends in partner provider provision. I think as well there's an opportunity to have a wider review of this budget to see whether there's any additional drivers that are impacting on the pressures that are being experienced, particularly around perhaps numbers of children attending, and also around whether partner providers is at a higher level than anticipated. We know that as a service, it does seem to carry a significantly higher number of 2-year-olds than you would expect to see. And 2-year-old placements are not necessarily standard practice and tend to happen after involvement of colleagues from other parts of the council. So that wider review of the budget, it would be easy to jump in and say, well, stop employing staff and have a look at the meals, and you better watch what you're doing in terms of partner providers. The review itself will be much more focused than that. It will look at the totality of the budget and the drivers that are influencing the spend, with a view to returning that back to budget, recognising that, you know, it's a budget we need to keep an eye on. It's one where Scottish Government have already intimated that they will review the quantum and review the allocation to councils. And at that point, you know, we are likely to be in a position where our allocation, I hope, will at least stand still. It may reduce, it certainly won't increase. And so that's something that we've got an additional driver that's also impacting on this budget in the next few months as well. So there's a real need to review this with a view to bringing something back to Cabinet after the schools go back in August to see just what the drivers are. We're very conscious that we don't have additional funding to place into this budget. And so it's about looking at the totality of the spend, the quantum, and what can be delivered within that quantum, taking account of what's happening in East Ayrshire, but also recognising that we don't work in this sector alone, and you know, there's maybe other opportunities for learning or for discussions taking place out with East Ayrshire and perhaps in other councils nearby.
Thanks, Joe. I'm going to bring in Linda here. Linda.
Thank you, and through you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Mackay, for the question. To provide a bit of further context, members, in regards to what on paper is an overspend in early years, I wanted to provide some further information in the space around about how these costs have been reached per se, and indeed, hopefully, as Joe has already alluded to, the need for a fuller budget review, not just involving the education services as we progress. So, colleagues, to highlight some of the issues that we do find are impacting on that budget and the reason we find ourselves in that position. Councillor Mackay, to take your first point, it is an incredibly successful provision. Our parents are really pleased with what they get, and clearly this is a 52-week service that's not around a term time type model. And clearly Joe also recognises we've spent significant time with our finance colleagues looking at anywhere where we can make these savings and return the budget to a balanced position, but that will require a much fuller consideration by both my own service and those of others. So in terms of some statistics to give some evidence around about this piece, there are two big areas in which we have significant numbers of young people uptaking. So that is around about deferrals, members. We had 135 deferrals. That's young people who stay in early years for an extra year. We're not funded for those. They stayed on in 22-23. We had another 134 who are registered to stay on in early years sector in 23-24. HMRC have designated 524 eligible families for places in East Ayrshire Council. We have the highest take-up in Scotland of those places. We have 213 young people in ECCs at the moment based on benefit eligibility. In addition, members, we have 183 young people who have been requested from colleagues in other services, such as the Health and Social Care Partnership, to attend early years settings. Now, Joe's alluded to this, but that's the quantum. It's 183. 90 of those young people are aged between 0 and 2. So again, they don't meet 1140 eligibility criterion, and 93 of those young people are aged between 2 and 3. So ultimately, we have 530 young people in our centres right now, and that's in addition, members, I'm sure we've all heard the phrase, it takes a village to raise a child, but that's also aligned with our inquiry model, where we're looking to incorporate more young people with ASN into our early years centres as well. There's a specific piece of inquiry going on Thank ECC at the moment. You'll be aware the ASN piece, the specialist provision for young people in ECCs nationally, is something that really does need to develop. We've put our head out on this one. We're already piloting something. It's working beautifully, and young people who wouldn't have had access to early years have it, which is, I think, credit to everyone in the room. And last couple of considerations is that of the pay award in regards to early years, as it pertains to early years, and at the risk of causing any negative commentary, it is a hugely young and female workforce, and at any point we have significant numbers of maternity leaves, also bringing in additional pressure to the budget. And also, colleagues, when we consider this alongside the SAC reduction that we are still experiencing in education, of the diminishing of the SAC funding here, that's also having a huge impact. We pay for all of our speech and language therapy through that, and post-pandemic, that's not something that going forward we can continue to do on our own. So I think there is absolutely, as Joe points out, that need for a further review, but that review will need to be taken in conjunction with other services around about how the places are funded and allocated. I hope that helps, Councillor Mackay.
Thanks. I'm sure there's some return to, it's there is an issue here, but we need to get a wee more understanding about it, what's causing the pressures, and I think Linda's given us a kind of flavour there, and we need to do some work, as you say, with comparable authorities. Maureen.
Well, thank you. And, both, I think this is helpful to sort of, start sort of giving us the framework for future discussion for us to look at. And I think, we hear your comments, we read what the issues are against the appalling child poverty stats that were published last week. I think I saw them for the first time, and that is very much the background at which we actually look at anything that's now coming forward, and we really welcome the work that's being done and look forward to those further discussions.
Thanks, Maureen. Anyone else before we move on? Joe.
Thank you, Chair. The revenue section on the accompanying report begins on page 16 and starts with a suite of services under the Chief Exec's office. I've already highlighted the challenges within education, but this report and these pages also provide members with details of the school carry forwards on a learning group basis, which is helpful. Within finance and ICT, service ended the year about just under £1 million underspent, as we now seek to implement our service redesign and put staff into posts. I've also taken the opportunity to set aside carry forwards for Scottish Welfare Fund, as well as providing £300,000 from finance and ICT balances for computer related services, including enhanced cyber security centre. The remaining information on page 17 notes underspends in governance, people in culture and corporate support. And in governance, we see that this is due to vacant posts, as well as additional income from planning and building warrant fees. And in people and culture, underspend mainly achieved from an over-recovery of income from salary sacrifice schemes. Noting that in people and culture and corporate support, these are services that, like my own, have had service redesigns approved and are in the process of recruiting staff to redesign posts. Within communities and economy, we highlight the budget transfers that will take place following approval. And in terms of Ayrshire Roads Alliance, we note the transfers of £550,000 made during the year to help offset parking income. And this service overall ended the year £20,000 over budget after absorbing the financial pressures from primary and secondary transport. In facility and property management, we note the reduced expenditure in the central repairs account, as well as staff savings across the service, and these were offset by additional costs in asset management due to loss of rental income and fee income, which was £400,000 less than anticipated. In housing and communities, the service has continued to face significant challenges, and although the service ended the year underspent by £240,000, this is largely due to external funding, which itself needs to be earmarked for use in this current financial year. And members, as I've said, within wellbeing, ended the year £1.9 million underspent after using £3.6 million of COVID funds. And we recognise the real pressures taking place within housing and communities and also within wellbeing. Within central services, and similar to Scottish Welfare Fund, we see overspends of £1 million in housing benefit and in council tax reduction or council tax benefit, where we're incurring costs in excess of the funding received. And it demonstrates again the financial challenges and the changing needs of residents and households across East Ayrshire. Paragraph 20, page 21 sets out information in respect of the housing revenue account. It shows lower than anticipated costs in terms of planned maintenance and debt charges and staffing costs. As members are aware, and as mentioned earlier, that £3 million will be retained within the HRA and used in the current year and beyond. Pupil Equity Fund begins on page 24 and sets out the financial year-end position by education group and shows that of the £5.4 million of pupil equity funding received, £4.5 million has been spent at 31st of March. A further £500,000 will be spent between now and the end of the academic year, and around £300,000 has been set aside for resources aimed at meeting the needs of young people and the fund itself. Chair, I'm happy to stop there and take any questions.
Thanks, Joe. Any questions on the Pupil Equity Fund or anything? Elaine?
Yeah, just some comments on the format of the report, actually, and how we look at the Pupil Equity Fund. I know it's a standard report and it reads like a balance sheet of funding allocated and what the spend is, but I feel there's an improvement here, that we could have more information about how the schools are actually spending their allocation. There's a lot of very good work going on in the schools that elected members maybe aren't getting that detail of. So I'm wondering if we can give consideration to look at improving either this section of the East Ayrshire Performance Report or pull out a spotlight report for some of the work that's been done in the different school clusters. Myself and Councillor Ingram were at St Joseph's a fortnight ago, and we had some really progressive work that's going on with the Pupil Equity Fund there, and it's actually having an impact on the attainment. And we heard last Cabinet how good the attainment figures have been this year, the best ever recorded. So I think there definitely is room for improving this report. So I'd be interested to see what other members of the Cabinet, especially the education reps, think of that suggestion.
I think it's always good to develop learning and share good practice. I think that's, between the schools and what's working, and obviously very nature, one size doesn't fit all, so there will be a wide range of depending on the nature of the school. Linda, do you want to come in and comment?
Yeah, through you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Cowan. I would agree. I think it would be nice to see a bit more detail there about some of the successful practice. So, members, for awareness, we do have a forum called the Children and Young People's Impact Forum, where we consider the three main funding streams. Those being, I won't use the acronyms, I promise. Those being the Pupil Equity Fund, the Care Experienced funding, and also now the Strategic Equity funding, which is to replace the old Scottish Attainment Challenge money. And actually, at those sessions, we bring heads in to present on how they have spent their PEF monies, and how those have been utilised and what the impact of the money is. So we would be happy, with the permission of Cabinet, if this is taken forward, to absolutely provide a few examples at each period potentially, or an agreed position, to give members more space, but also to extend an open invite to any members that want to come along and see one of the spotlight sessions in terms of what we would see as the Children and Young People's Impact Forum. Absolutely to extend that, or indeed bring a few live heads along at some point to do a spotlight on PEF specifically. So more than happy to take that forward, Councillor Cowan, through you, Chair.
There's a number of people nodding in agreement. But Barry?
Thank you, Chair. And Linda, yeah, I absolutely agree with that. Some members who were here in the last term will recall when I was Chair of Governance and Scrutiny, we actually had Kilmarnock Academy in to, showcase to the committee some of the great work that we're doing. And whilst I know what Councillor Cowan's comments are, I think in a lot of ways this has to be set out as a balance sheet, because ultimately something that has always been an issue, I think, when it comes to PEF funding, is we've got schools who are really good at spending it and schools where there are issues. And in some cases, you look back over time, it's consistently similar names that appear where there perhaps are issues around that. However, that's not to say that I'm doing great work with the money that they have got and they are using. And I think to spotlight that would be good. Whether we do that potentially with some of the schools being able to come in to Cabinet and share their experience. It has worked with GNS before. It could go through GNS and Cabinet, I would have thought. So, yeah, whilst I welcome it, I do, and maybe some more detail to follow up to this. I think we still have to have a balance sheet approach here to look at this, because ultimately we cannot, as Cabinet, influence how that money is spent, absolutely rightly, because the money is there for schools to spend and spend as they see fit. But we've got to look at it from a point of view of if we have concerns about where money isn't being spent, because ultimately it hasn't happened today, but there will come a time when there are balances left, and my fear is the Scottish Government say thank you very much, we'll have that back, please. So I welcome anything we can do that can showcase some of the good work. Thanks.
Thanks, Barry. Eddie, you want to come in? Oh, sorry, Maureen.
Yes, thank you. No, I hear what my colleague said, and I think Elaine's right to highlight we really do, as elected members, need to hear more about the very good work that's going on in schools. I do want to just put forward, and I'm not going to highlight the individual schools, but I do note perhaps particularly among some of our bigger campuses and shared campuses, I see an improvement this year in terms of what the actual spend is, which means that there is less carry forward. And I know that's something that we have sat in here as Cabinet and highlighted and raised in the past. So again, I welcome the good work and the experience and learning sharing that there has been, which I think will have resulted in the fact that there is less carry forward, as I say, in relation to some of these perhaps shared campuses where it was particularly marked before. So I accept and acknowledge the success in that. And again, I suppose just to pick up on my colleagues' point here, I can do that because I actually have the figures in front of me and I can do the maths to see the contrast in terms of what the carry forward improvement figures are.
Thanks. Bring an Eddie in on for extra comment.
Thanks, Chair. I suppose we're talking about two different things here. We're talking about governance around the money, and that's what we see here. And the second thing we're talking about then is the impact of that. So again, I think this gives us the governance around the money, and we can see that transparently. But what we need to do is find a proper forum, to find the impact around that. Clearly it'll be for cabinet members to decide what we would normally do at cabinet, but having presentations at that time has not been a normal function that we would have, you know, at cabinet. We find that, you know, yes, including that there's areas within this report where there's the members' briefings, as we call it, where you can put areas within there specifically, and we can also find lots of other forums, you know, whether that be G&S for a deep dive, whether it be member seminars where we actually go through, you know, some level of detail, you know, around, you know, what we're doing around it. So I think we do need to separate the two things around governance, you know, actually the resource, but impact, and if the area that we're not getting is actually seeing that impact, you know, I'm sure in terms of learning, you know, across the education, you know, like service, that's what Linda's talking about, you know, the management function, clearly that would be one of the things that we would do, you know, in terms of doing that is learning across. I do think it's the transparency of that good work that we're missing. You know, like the transparency of the work that's going on out there, we're not seeing highlighted anywhere, and therefore being able to take forward. So there are a couple of things I think we would need to take away from it, Chair, you know, in terms of making sure we're transparent about the governance, but actually also, you know, as Councillor Cowan and others have said, you know, making sure that we can highlight the good work that's out there and the impact that that's actually having on our young people.
I'm sure that, you know, the work will interest all members, you know, and all members of the cabinet. I don't know whether some kind of seminar or some kind of presentation just to show some of the examples of some of the best practice, Linda, maybe a thing we could organise during the summer. I don't know.
Yeah, and through you, Chair, just for some additional kind of context to PEF. PEF's a consultation exercise, and I think it's really important that I would certainly recognise the role that members play in parent councils for the schools, and they're a mandatory body in terms of consultation on PEF and indeed for reporting on PEF, both of which are mandated. Now, every school must publish, it's a legal requirement, must publish their school improvement plan on an annual basis, and in that improvement plan must be embedded the plans to spend their PEF as part of that improvement plan, because the two are intrinsically linked. We can't have a PEF being used for something that's not a focus for the school per se. So ultimately, members, that in terms of transparency, I would say that, you know, I know lots of you are already involved in your schools and your wards and the parent council steering groups, but that's a mandatory consultation that the head should be having about how that money is spent. I know some of the sums are incredibly small, but it's that participatory piece that's really important within PEF, but then mandated to heads, and they must sign their school improvement plans when they're submitted. They'll be coming in at the end of this month when the schools close, but actually embedded in there are all of the PEF plans as to what the school is planning. And I suppose last comment on this, and I know I'm taking Councillor Cowan's point about a kind of more accountancy type approach to PEF, the carry forwards are permitted in terms of more strategic spends that might span us across 2 or 3 years. A school may have committed to a certain reading scheme, for example, whereby they've entered into an approved procurement contract with a provider that maybe commits them in for 3 years. And the other piece is the staff costs here would run us right through the summer as well. So that would take us to August. So really just a wee bit more quantification around PEF. There's huge amounts of transparency there. And obviously all school improvement plans have to be, as does the education service plan, have to be published by law, and indeed to actually provide clear reference to those PEF plans, and indeed in the look back in the standards and quality report. So just to say another level of transparency in the space is around about the mandatory planning. Through you, Chair. Thanks.
Okay. Anyone else? I think that's a good way ahead, and we'll look forward to that. Anyone else? Okay, it was a good discussion on that. Is it where are we now? Is the capital where are we now?
We're in page 27, Chair, alternative delivery models. We note here information in relation to Ayrshire Roads Alliance and the Leisure Trust in respect of the Alliance. The position with the year end is similar to that highlighted during the financial year, namely an underspend in the strategic delivery, principally due to lower staff costs and lower insurance costs and additional income. And within our own local delivery east, we see an overspend of £212,000 due to a shortfall in road maintenance fee income as a result of the slowdown, as mentioned earlier in the programme, while the service reviewed and considered the price increases of road materials. Also, additional costs within supplies and services subcontractors offset by reduction in roads maintenance and additional income from rechargeable works. In terms of roads capital, we note the challenges around supply chain materials in respect of bridges. And we also note that in terms of the bus station improvement, that a further capital bid for £1 million will be submitted to SPT for consideration. The report highlights as well the work taking place around the refurbishment of car parks, as well as the resurfacing and the LED replacement work that the service is undertaking. Moving on to the Leisure Trust, the final position is a year-end underspend of just over £300,000, and that's made up, as you can see from the table, across various elements of the Trust. And the Trust will earmark that in their budget going forward. Members, moving on to Treasury, it begins on page 30. Highlights our debt portfolio of £400,000, 81% of which is fixed with the Public Works Loan Board. It shows the Council has a total investment of just under £40 million deposited mainly on call to support our own cash flow. And as members would expect, given what's happening, work is taking place supported by our Treasury advisors to give us real-time and latest information on impacts on rates, the wider economy, and borrowing rates in particular. We know that the Monetary Policy Committee will meet next week, and the indications from our Treasury advisors, based on the very latest information, is that interest rates or borrowing costs for us will rise, and with the latest information suggesting, sadly, that the level of those rates will be towards the top end of previous expectations, which is a real concern for us, with a £249 million capital programme and underlying need to borrow, a borrowing trigger rate at 4%, but 4.2%, and inflation and an interest rate significantly higher than that. So a real watching brief, a real worry, I've got to be honest, in terms of the Treasury position. We are looking at it continually. We're meeting our Treasury advisors monthly for that in-depth review of the economy and on projections. So members, be assured that's what we're doing in Treasury, but it is a concern at the moment. And Chair, happy to stop there and take any questions.
Thanks, Joe. It's just maybe the alternative delivery models. Just questions most members are getting frequently asked. In terms of some of the detail in some of these projects, it would be quite useful to know just what the additional spend in the bus station is, for example. And I know there's certainly the opening of Above Adventure car parking issue continues, and I think there's quite a good news story out there. I might just want to inform people there's going to be a significant car parking for people, which will help businesses within that locality. If that could maybe be publicised a bit more.
Through you, Chair, certainly. I don't have that information to hand, but I'll certainly follow that up with colleagues and provide information back to Cabinet.
Thanks, Joe. Barry.
Thanks, Chair. Just a couple of points on the bus station, Kilmarnock bus station. Maybe might be more appropriate under capital programme, but I believe there's been some delays relative to getting some of the steel required. And I just wondered if there were any issues that we are aware of in relation to costs there and the timescales for that delivery. Another issue was, we're talking about the economy, some of the issues. I was reading an article yesterday suggesting 10% of people with mortgages are currently, there is mortgage debt, so there is an element of arrears, which I think is a worrying statistic. But with the gilt values now, it's higher, as I think, than it was at the time where Kwasi Kwarteng's mini budget, which obviously caused the economy to go into tailspin. It's higher than it was then. What are the sort of implications for us, I think? But just in general, there's economic outlook, there's some difficulties ahead. Some of the mood music certainly changed. I think from what we saw just a few months ago, there was a lot of doom and gloom. Didn't seem to emerge, but I think those dark clouds are on the horizon again, I'm afraid. Through you, Chair, before I pass across to Simon in the bus station, there's unusual things happening that are leading to unusual things being reported. You'll learn more later on this month when Julie brings the annual accounts to Council for review and for approval. One of those surprising things is in relation to corporate bonds or government gilts, which are normally at par or at zero, which are now attracting a higher interest rate. And the impact of that, strangely, is that on our balance sheet, and you'll, as I said, you'll learn this later on in the month, we have a pension liability because we operate a pension scheme, an Strathclyde pension scheme. That liability last year was £80 million. Because of the unusually high rates of corporate bonds and gilts, it means that for 22-23, we don't have a pension liability. We actually have a pension asset of hundreds of millions of pounds. We've been away looking at accounting standards to bring that back down and learn wherever we can. And so you'll find in the accounts that one of the implications is that we've now got an asset on the pension rather than a liability. Really unusual. And that's some of the things we're seeing. We're seeing things that we didn't really expect to see in a whole number of areas. And that's why I've taken the step of having a Teams call for a couple of hours every month with our Treasury advisors and with the economists that are within Link to give us real information on what's happening so that we can support colleagues in housing and communities, support colleagues in facilities and property management in terms of borrowing and when they would want to do that for, say, the housing programme or for our general fund capital programme, and when we can afford to enter the market to do that. And that's something we'll take forward as we go through. I'm happy to stop there at the moment and pass across to Simon through you, Chair.
Thanks, Joe. Simon, in terms of the bus station and other issues.
Yeah, thanks. Through you, Chair. I was actually speaking to a colleague yesterday afternoon and advised that there is a delay at the bus station through supply of materials. We're looking into the detail of that and just what the impact will be in terms of progress and the completion date, but it is around about steel and the issues that are facing the market just now.
Okay, and we'll have an update on that as soon as we've got that available to circulate it to members. Okay, Barry.
No, just to echo that comment, Leader, that I think it is important that we are updated, but also that we keep the public updated in this, because I think all eyes are on the bus station and any project the council undertakes, but the bus station in particular, we're involved there. And I think if we can share some information, that would be useful in due course.
No, absolutely. The project overall has been taking a length of time. A lot of the issues are out with our control, so I think we need to, keep the public on board with us and just keep them updated with information. I think that's really important to the success of the project. Okay, capital next, and just back to you, Simon.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Capital programmes continue to make steady progress, but as noted in the covering report, is facing significant challenges due to the current economic climate. The asset investment team within facilities and property management are using their professional expertise to ensure that every opportunity is taken to deliver all projects as economically as possible. And that includes the areas around about design, specification, but also the procurement approach. It's also worth explaining that for some time budgets, particularly for learning estate projects, have been based on Scottish Futures Trust cost and area metrics. However, the current market conditions are indicating costs that are significantly higher than these metrics. It just demonstrates the volatility in the marketplace just now. So turning to the main report, as usual, I won't go through it in detail, but if I could provide you with an update on a selection of projects in relation to their stage of development. Projects recently completed include the early years facilities at Catrin and Domellington, along with SHIP programme developments at Witch Road and Bellevue Gardens in Kilmarnock. There's approximately 14 million of construction contracts currently on site, including the new build Dunlop Early Childhood Centre, where superstructure works are ongoing. As we've just touched on, the final phase of works at Kilmarnock Bus Station, which is progressing but facing some challenges with material supply issues. And we have the new build assisted living development as part of the SHIP programme at Kilmarnock Road in Mauchline. Projects at a detailed design stage include the Galston office project, where tenders have recently been received and are currently being assessed. The St Sophia's Enerfit refurbishment, where tender documents have recently been issued to the market, and the landscape and development of St Marnock Square, where revised designs have been agreed and the tenders are being prepared for that. Projects at the earlier stages of development include the Doon Valley Community Campus, where the RIBA Stage 3 proposals have now been locked down with all stakeholders. A planning application is due to be lodged in the near future, and a PQQ, that's a pre-qualification questionnaire, has been issued to the market to shortlist tendering contractors. It should be noted, as is in the report, that cost estimates continue to indicate significant financial pressure on the project. In relation to the Ayrshire growth deal, as we spoke about earlier, the site for phase 3 at Moorfield's now been purchased, allowing more detailed design work to progress. And based on the revised programme, it's anticipated the first phase of works could commence in the summer of 24. The Moorfield site's also provided an opportunity to include the AMIC development following the complications of the previous site at Belfield, and designs are also currently being developed. Thanks, Chair. That's just a brief overview of some of the projects, but happy to answer any questions on these or any others.
Thanks, Simon. It was, I think Maureen pointed out earlier on just about our discussions yesterday in our visit, and one of the many items that came up during there is for me, is the one Dunlop Street, 12 Stroud Street. I think we need to get something delivered there. I think that's having an effect in the wider regeneration of the area. And, I think we need to make early decisions on this, and I would urge that we need an early paper comes to council to review what we're trying to achieve there at the earliest opportunity. I'll maybe not say any more than that. I'll bring Barry then, Drew.
Thank you, Chair. I think just to echo, absolutely, I think we do need a paper as soon as possible in that regard. I mean, Simon, I just wanted to ask the question. It's certainly been propped up for, I would reckon, about 20 years, that building, in terms of scaffolding. It must be there 15 plus years, I would reckon. What are the costs to date to that? I mean, I don't know. I don't expect you to have it to hand, but we maybe get that information to members, because I would be keen to see what we've spent to date just actually securing that building. And certainly when you look at everything else around it, particularly the Ingram Business Centre, I would have liked the opportunity to view it, down into it from the Ingram Business Centre. But you look at that fantastic building, and then obviously what we've got at Dunlop Street, Surround Street, it is having a bit of an impact, but keen to hear.
That's what Simon, yeah.
Yes, certainly through you, Chair. I can assess what those costs are and bring them back. There's certainly no ongoing revenue costs. It's not as if there's a hire of scaffolding there. It's that was purchased at the outset of the project, as my understanding, but I can get the detail around about that and come back. The other thing just to say is it was raised at a meeting yesterday, and we are now pushing forward in the first stage of trying to tidy up at least the vegetation in and around the area, and works are ongoing to start to remove that, and proposals will be brought forward for the kind of future use of the space.
Thanks, Simon. Drew.
Thanks, Chair. And thanks, Simon. We've finally got there with the new build at Dolmellington, the ECC. It's a great success, and especially outdoors. The children love the outdoor space, which is fantastic, especially in this weather as well. But I'm a wee bit kind of let down a wee bit with the Doon campus side of things. I pride myself, I've been at every meeting basically, because it's the biggest investment in the Doon Valley. But I was here last week at the Melton Community Council meeting, and none of the local members knew anything about this. But at a shadow meeting of the Doon campus, a couple of community council reps were there as the shadow group, and they reported back to the community council that the Doon campus was actually in jeopardy, something to do with SEPA. Could you advise on that, said Simon, if that's correct?
Through you, Chair. Perhaps in jeopardy is not how I would explain it. There's a change to the NPF, the National Planning Framework Policy, that was introduced earlier this year. NPF 4 is the title of it, which introduces a more significant flood risk, which adds on elements of climate change to what was in the previous planning framework. Now, there always has been, and it has been assessed by the engineers as part of the project, a degree of surface water flooding in and around the site. This new policy framework has increased that level. So we have looked at mitigation to address that and have a solution that is on the table. However, we do need to talk to SEPA and it's challenging to get in touch with them, but we think we're getting there in terms of setting up a meeting to establish if we can actually reduce the mitigation that we've put in place and reduce the cost that would incur. But there is a solution to the issue that's there.
That's fine, Simon, but I would just ask that you let the local members know at the earliest possible point as you can, because it's no use going to a meeting we don't know nothing about it when it's brought up. So I would appreciate that. Thank you.
That is true. It's almost sometimes where there's a will, there's a seeper. I think, you know, I mean, the Doon Valley campus is a high priority, not just for the Doon Valley, but just in terms of development of the whole East Ayrshire Council estate. It's really important to us, so we really need to keep our eye firm on the ball on this one, and any, you know, representation to see that we need to make from here. Jim.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's always worthy to note that during like these times, with financial restraints on the council, that we're still delivering and delivering quality. When we see part of that SHIP programme at Which Road, the visit there and talking to the resident for that was absolutely fantastic. A great day with Mr McCluskey, and also following on for that quarter now and seeing Morgan Road coming to fruition as well for the assisted living there as well. So we're really delighted. I'm glad to see, Simon, eventually we'll get Glazenick Street open again, coming down off the back of that building. I did comment that we've had 3 Prime Ministers for that was shut, but we're glad to see it, and it's delighted it's open. The point I'd like to make is round about Netherthird Primary School, and I know the pressures we were under to get the kids back into Netherthird, and that visit that we had last week really emphasised how important it was for the kids to get back into Netherthird. However, the way that the grounds were left, and I get the reasons behind that, but I think going forward, I think we've got to make sure that when we deliver a school and the maintenance contract for the grounds round about that, we'll leave it in a similar fashion we would leave a house when we deliver a house, like Which Road, for example. And it's just part of that, because we had issues when in the third early years and looking at how that ground maintenance was going to be looked after. So it's just something that I think when we're coming to looking at agreements that we get the ground maintenance left in a condition that we can more or less take it on instead of them.
Thanks. I mean, there is a potential magnificent view out that community space, and just to leave a mound earth there, you know, I just don't think it's satisfactory. I think we really need to do something. I understand some of the reasons behind it, but I know that we'll need to do. So I agree. Need to do something about it. Simon, I don't know if you want to comment.
Yeah, thanks through you, Chair. Yeah, completely understand. I mean, the specifics with Netherthird, we'd hope to be back in Easter to finish off, or the contractor to come back to finish off the external areas. The wet weather was unkind then, it was unable to be done. And now, as Councillor McMahon will be aware, undertaking that over the summer to finish it off. It would be great to have these facilities completely finished, including all the external areas, and be able to hand it over in the winter. Sometimes the challenges of you know, continuing the education provision require you to bring the pupils back maybe before everything externally is finished off. And certainly with some of the projects, like the Doon campus, for example, where we look at tandem builds, you know, you have to finish the school and demolish the old one before you can do the external areas. So there'll always be a kind of overlap in terms of having everything finished off. But I completely take your point. It'd be great, and whenever we can, we try and finish absolutely everything off 100%.
And Eddie?
I just feel that it would be remiss of me not to talk about the grounds in Netherthird, you know, primary. As when I was there, both the staff and the Waynes got a hold of me, you know, when I was there. And when we do finish it off, making sure it's suitable for football is what was the big thing that was ringing through my ear in terms of that. So although there was mounds there and all that, they were certainly telling me the purposes that they thought that would be for. And some of the young people were so clear about it, I felt it would be remiss of me not to pass that on at this stage and sit quiet.
Okay, no, that's Maureen.
So let's stick with Netherthird first of all, just to say, you know, it was wonderful to have been there. in terms of the official opening of that fabulous building. I was absolutely thrilled to bits for the young people and thrilled to bits for their community as well. But what it did do was it highlighted for me again in terms of we are still nowhere in relation to North West Kilmarnock schools, plural, and I think that's something that's really important to underline. And I know that's not through any failures of ours. Again, I think the submission, complete with fabulous video, could not have been better from our point going forward. It is exceedingly frustrating that here we are, we were already saying 2027, clearly we are not. And not only that, but because of the complexity of what our ambition is for this project and the knock-on effect on this, it really is having a knock-on effect in terms of our overall ability to move forward. And I really do sympathise with Drew in terms of, you know, there is Doon campus, everybody works hard, the community, all the young people are seriously committed to it, their parents are seriously committed to it, and again, through no fault of our own, we are not moving forward with it. So yet again, I think we're in the situation of pressing government for a decision in relation to this one.
Absolutely. I know that's an issue for all 32 authorities, and it's a national issue, and I'll continue to press this through COSLA. I know we have been having conversations with ministers about the importance of this as well. Ed, do you want to add in?
Yes, it's absolutely. So, I mean, there are two parts to what we're waiting to hear. So, clearly, first of all, we're waiting to hear whether there's a resource being given to us. And then the second part we would want to understand is what the conditions on that resource are. You know, so for us to get the best outcomes across the estates in North West Kilmarnock, getting a resource handed to us, it's got all sorts of conditions that the whole resource goes onto one site, might not be the best outcome for us. But we do need to understand the external decisions before we then can internally, you know, make the assessments about what the best way forward is. And I know members, you know, are across all our schools, but, you know, certainly I was up in, you know, Hill Head at the Masked Entertainer, and it was just fantastic to see how our teachers and young people get on with the facilities that they've got, but they're clearly not ideal facilities to reach the outcomes that we would want to do in the area.
Excited. Yeah. So we'll keep members updated with any progress in that as well. Okay. Is that all capital? Yeah. So next is people there. Amanda.
Thanks, Chair. Morning, members. The people pages start on page 36, with the statistics for absence being on page 37. They show an increase in over the year of a 2.49 workdays lost per employee. It's clear to say that the stats show a negative picture. Members will know that earlier this year we brought an update to the policy review for supporting attendance at work, noting that policy was introduced in early 2020, which caused obviously difficulties for managers in monitoring the impact of the new policy due to the pandemic. The changes that were agreed earlier this year were in the main to embed the new policy further, to embed further guidance, toolkits, advice and training. It's also agreed that we had brought in someone temporary to look at the absence statistics. So a full analysis of the absence statistics was undertaken, and we've presented that to CMT. Currently myself and my team are doing a bit further work on that, and we'll bring back a report to Cabinet after the recess. The report will detail a deeper dive into the stats, comparing with other councils where appropriate, and also looking at the health, non-direct health, society and economic impacts within that as well. Page 38 shows the disciplinary activity with 5 outcomes still under consideration. That was at the time of the report. 4 of these outcomes have now been concluded. and noting that there were 6 dismissals over the year, and I would note that 4 out of these 6 did not appeal the decision. There was 1 whistleblowing case throughout the year, and this has been discussed with the employee and addressed. There was an action plan put in place, and all parties concerned were happy to close the matter off. Page 39 notes the headcount figures showing an increase of 187 over the year. However, the FTE figures are also on that page just show an increase of 22.66, which is not comparable. But this is due to a significant amount of the new headcount coming in being part-time, in particular community care officers, and a number of employees reducing their hours. Developing the young workforce, numbers continue to increase. And page 40 gives an update on recruitment. Note that the hard-to-fill posts still are within the partnership, social workers and community care officers. And within that sector, we continue with the fortnightly recruitment events locally for community care officers, and also looking at Grow Your Own for social workers. Other sectors with difficult to fill posts within ARA, the technical posts, which include technical officers, engineers, electricians, etc. Within finance and ICT, senior accountants. We continue to look at alternative ways of advertising, better ways to attract. We also obviously are deeply involved with our Grow Your Own projects for your succession planning. Payroll activities noted in page 40, noting the number of pays processed, and that I would just note that we're in the process of, hopefully we're piloting just now the electronic mileage process, which will be rolled out across the council by September. And as Joe had already mentioned, the over income fares with the car leasing has increased from 99 at the same point last year to 341 at this point. Communication key points, including significant work update on the website, supporting the cost of living campaign and continued media inquiry and press releases, and our OD key points, including embedding and coaching process across the council, increasing the numbers who have access to the online face experience, and work is underway with both a CMT and elected member development programme. That's a brief summary of the people pages, and I'm happy to stop there and take any questions.
Thanks, Amanda. It's been really quite refreshing to see a number of young people, including their apprentices and the graduate interns, to meet some of them in the recent visits that we've had around some of the facilities. It's great to get that workforce planning underway. Special thanks to officers in helping in that process, Amanda. Any comments on the people section? Thanks for that, Amanda. Okay, next bit, health and safety, and David.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, members. Just take Cabinet through the annual safety summary report. If I could just draw everyone's attention to the top of page 43. We noted that the number of non-reportable incidents over the year has increased slightly by 26 and compared to the previous year, while the number of incidents to HSE has decreased by 9. That decrease of 9 in the reportable incidents is mainly due to a reduction in occupational disease reports attributable to COVID infections, which is more than halved in a year. Further down the page, it noted that incidents under the category of violence and aggression accounts for 63% of all reports to health and safety. I'm disappointed to note that that's really unchanged from the previous year, where it was also 63% of reports. Just to give Cabinet some context, Chair, violence and aggression incidents were 1,204 over the year. The nearest other category of incident we have is slips, trips and falls at 199 incidents. So that gives some context to the incidents of violence and aggression that we receive. As previously advised, Chair, it's an incredibly challenging area, not just here in East Ayrshire Council, but across all councils, and in fact across all public sector organisations, NHS, fire, police, all public sector have this challenge with violence and aggression in the workplace. But we continue here to work with the Chief Executive Strategy Group, trade union colleagues, I also chair an educational focus group with trade union colleagues as well. And we'll look at the risk control measures that we have in place and discuss any further actions that we can take to reduce violence and aggression in our workplace. And we'll continue to have a focus on that, Chair. Well, it's not specifically covered in this report, Chair. I think it'd be important for me to make members aware that Scottish Fire and Rescue Service will call challenge all fire alarm activations, with the exception of residential units, which are excluded from 1st of July this year. This change is going to basically mean two things for us. The first being that fire service won't automatically come out to buildings when the fire alarm goes off, which is something we've all become used to in the past. And the second is that we're having to train designated staff to go and actually do fire checks in buildings. And that's an exercise we've already started and will continue through the months, specifically focused in education at this point in time, bearing in mind that schools will be stopping in July. So in order to ensure that smooth transition after this policy change in 1st July, we've also updated our fire safety standards, and we're in the final stages of creating an e-learning package for all staff and a Q&A guidance document, which will issue in time for this coming in, Chair. The final bit I would say in this, Chair, is just a reminder for everybody of the importance to signing out in and out of buildings and use the registers. This is going to become even more important than it was before to support the evacuation controllers like Robert and his team, and evacuation controllers we have in all of our other buildings, make sure that people are accounted for and that people are safe. Finally, Chair, I just put a wee bereavement support said card in front of everybody. These were just delivered to us this week. These contain a lot of guidance in them for self-care, and also contain some guidance and supports that are both internal and external. This is a new resource that we've been working on for a wee while now, and I'm delighted that it's there. We've started to distribute to partners in Police Scotland. We'll be doing a joint launch with them soon. Bereavement services, human resources officers will get them as well, register services, and we've also been delivering to our local undertakers as well. So that concludes my report, Chair, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks very much, David. Maybe just one point in terms of the changes to who's responsible for the fire and fire alarms. I think that, again, quoting this visit yesterday, but I mean, it became, quite a concern from members that we were speaking to, and some of these offices, particularly, where we've got some historic storage. And I think we urgently need a review for that. I'll not say much more than that, but I know the chief executive has duly noted some issues that we really need to address. And the other issue I was just saying, in terms of, as people are now returning to work, some of these incidents in terms of violence is bound to increase, but hopefully we can provide support where we can during this process. And I think you've given a great example of that. The bereavement support that's a terrific initiative, and as people are kind of finding ways, different ways as they come back to their work and need quite a bit of support. Members, any other points? Jim.
Thanks, Chair. David, and it's on that issue and about the 1,204 incidents of violence and aggression, and I mean, trying to minimise or simplify the reasons for that. I heard a bit of debate running about what constitutes a violent incident or an aggressive incident. So for the least level of aggression and violence, could you give me any examples of that you would record to even go to the extent, I mean, I'm not wanting to go to the extent of the most violent, but for least?
Through you, Chair, it's a good question. Basically, we don't really put any sort of parameters on it. It's down to the person themselves and how they feel about the incident that's actually happened to them. So we can have some what most people would consider to be fairly trivial incidents. So, for instance, somebody shouting at someone, and that's reported as a violence and aggression incident. But that's important to that person themselves. They felt either intimidated or they felt that was something that they felt important enough to report. So as a council, as a health and safety service, we don't really put any, if you like, boundaries around what people can and cannot report. It's down to the individual themselves. I hope that answers the question, Chair.
Eddie will come in. Yeah.
So, I mean, one of the things we would emphasise at the Health and Safety Strategy Group is access to SHE for, you know, a reporting system for every single employee. And indeed in other places where, you know, people felt councils were putting barriers into folk reporting, you know, I think, and it was actually some of our education trade union colleagues were actually be very supportive of the access that they have to be able to report, you know, when they wish to do so. And, you know, just totally supporting, you know, like what David is saying, you know, something that feels violence and aggression to one person doesn't feel it to another. And so the fact that everyone can report and therefore get the appropriate feedback and support, I suppose that, and it's that follow-up and proportionate support and feedback that's there. But we absolutely encourage, you know, our employees to report violence and aggression, because without that, we're never going to see the trends, and it can reach situations that, you know, pop up at us then if we actually don't see the trends. And, you know, obviously, I would say that our system is an effective system to actually do that and continue to encourage people to do that.
Thanks very much, Eddie. Okay, any morning. It's Drew was first. Sorry, Drew.
Right, thanks, Chair. I'd just like to take this opportunity, it's not actually on the paper, but I'd try to take this opportunity to thank David Dorrans and the team, Michelle Stokes and Amy. This is our second round last Thursday and Friday of our water safety training at Lochdoon. On the Thursday we had New Cumnock Primary School, and a great turnout from them. Very knowledgeable. Some of the questions that were asked in the emergency services, really good. There was one pupil that did stick out, was the Chief Fire Officer's E. McGeegan's son, Rory. He told me that he was going to get his dad to sack me. But that was great in the Thursday. But on the Friday we had Doon Academy, and I'm glad that the head of education is here. I've got two wee things I would like to ask you, Linda. It's maybe fed back to me basically on the day from the emergency services itself as well. The first one was is consents. Out of 80 consent forms that sent out at Doon Academy, there was only 23 come back to us. So it was really disappointing there was only 23 turned up on the Friday. If we'd known that, we could have actually had Patna and St Saviour's schools there, because the bus actually came from Patna. And I think David actually funded the buses himself as well, Ken. So it's, as far as I'm aware, that in Doon Academy, it's kind of antiquated the way they do consents. Every event that's outside the school, they've got to try and get consent forms for it. But I've been told that other schools in East Ayrshire, they do an annual one. So I would like you to look at that, if possible, for the Doon Valley schools, if you can. So the parents have got to opt out then, yeah.
Yeah, just to pick up on that, there's no separate rule for the Doon Valley schools on this one. We're all bound by the same consent arrangements in that regard, and you know, it's just a shame we weren't made aware of that before the event, and we could have actually put that in place. But Julie Hope, my Deputy Head of Education, is here, and she has responsibility for operations. So I'm just going to hand over for a wee bit further information, if I may, through you, Chair, around about the consent piece, if that's okay.
Julie, yeah, thanks.
Thanks to you, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Filson, for that. Yeah, I'm disappointed to hear that, obviously, and that's not something we want to be a barrier to young people being able to participate. My digital officer and myself are actually going to be doing a bit of work over the summer, looking specifically at consent forms. So this is very timely. We were just speaking about this week in our business meeting, and we are looking at being able to have an annual consent form that would cover more of the run-of-the-mill, if you like, activities and trips that schools have, so parents can give one consent. And we know it's a frustration as well for parents to receive, you know, multiple consent forms in the 1 week. Exceptions to that would obviously be adventurous activities, residential experiences where there would need to be separate arrangements made. But yeah, we are looking to simplify that whole process. So like Linda, if we'd known about that, we would have definitely been able to intervene, but I'm sorry to hear that. Thank you.
Apologise. They're finding it hard to actually get access to the schools. They're sometimes only getting 30 minutes or something like that. Yeah, and so I would like to maybe have a look at it and see if we can actually get something into the curriculum from March to June somehow and get a right period there, if that would be possible, to have a wee look at that. Work with fire services and that day, if that would be possible. Because it really is important. This life skill will save, they'll carry it the rest of their life, all the children. We can't do enough in this.
Again, through you, Chair, and Councillor Filson, I think if the services are clear as to what time they need, and are clear about that with the head teachers concerned, and if they weren't receiving that, again, let us know. We would totally, and you've seen the trade of emails recently, really value the inputs from the emergency services to schools. But I think it's also important, emergency services can sometimes just ask us for access. Really important that they maybe let us know how long that's for, target audience, etc. And if there is any reluctance, there really wouldn't be, I would hope, but clearly we can take that up with the individual schools if there's any issues. What we can't do is put time on the curriculum per se for it. It's more of an event rather than an integrated part of the curriculum. Some parts are integrated into the curriculum around about sort of CPR and emergency first aid and a lot of the mental health piece. They're integrated as part of statutory entitlement in PSE, but the other aspects are taken as events, and while we would always support them, I think again if we get a really good heads up on when these events are happening and comms in between times about schools, you know, taking uptake, we'll help with that.
Thanks, Linda. It's maybe just into communication again. So, and the last one was, I think coming back for the schools, was the transport costs again, to try and get the kids to them, Ken. So, obviously David funded it this time out of his budget, Ken, so I don't know. I would hate that would actually stop the schools coming to the water training every year if it's a matter of the schools paying for the buses again. So.
And again, Councillor Filson, without rehearsing the pressure on our own budgets in education that we've already been through in EAP and transport costs, you know, even on an obligation basis in regards to statutory transport, we acknowledge the price of those. And we absolutely recognise David's generosity in the space around about that. But ultimately, it's out with our control in regards to the transport piece. It's the prices were quoted. So again, it's difficult for us. We don't have the funding to be able to put that in place. But the schools need to look at how that's done as well if they want to take part in that way. So it's a difficult one for us all.
Thank you.
I think it's absolutely something that we need to look into. You know, this kind of warm weather. You know, we've seen the video. You know, children are attracted to water, and you know, during the years we've seen. You know, remember in open cast we saw some horrendous videos. You know, people get into bodies of water that just shouldn't have been there. And you know, I would like to see, you know, the next opportunity you're doing the water safety. I would love to come down and see it firsthand. I'm just going to maybe Rory, what he's saying, maybe give him a bravery award as well for that. But Elaine.
Thank you. Obviously, everybody's budgets are under severe strain at the moment, but I'm just wondering what opportunities there are to ask the fire service if they can have any input or contributions.
I think we'll approach as many people as we can. I think it's these things are priorities for us, but most many, but as.
It's certainly, with the community planning partners, we have a range of conversations with them, around budget and actually the national partners, both police and fire and rescue have very limited local budgets that they have flexibility over. So, I was in a meeting with Ian just the other day and, the majority of his budget is already committed, but it's very small budgets that they have flexibility over. Won't stop us asking, in terms of that. But I think just being honest here, our national partners have very little flexibility over local budgets.
Maureen.
I think what Elaine says makes actually sound sense. It would almost under our heading be a spend to save. If they are actually doing some investment, it might divert them actually going out on emergency calls. So I think it's a decent call to put it to them maybe under those terms. That certainly sounds worthwhile to me. Could I just ask, and this one is completely out of left field, and is to do with David's booklet here. It just reminded me a conversation that I'd had with the organisation NODA, No One Dies Alone, Ayrshire, who are being increasingly successful to be being asked to provide services. But unfortunately, they're being asked to provide services, paid for services, out with our own area. So I'm taking advantage of the juxtaposition of this booklet being given to us and Joe Gibson being here from Health and Social Care Partnership to just sort of, again, look at, are we making best use potentially of a resource that was actually grown within East Ayrshire? I understand that Wigtonshire, for example, have a direct contract with NODA. It seems daft that we don't when that resource is available potentially to us. So just to ask for that as an investigation. And David, thank you for the booklet.
That's good. Do you want to comment?
Thank you, through you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Mackay. Absolutely happy to look at that. We've recently been looking at both our suicide prevention and our bereavement strategies, so we would be keen to consider all options. So I'm not aware if we commission with them directly, but I'll look into it and happy to report back to you. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Graham?
Thanks, Dougie. I think we're on the health and safety subject. I think it would be remiss of me not to mention the fact that the health and safety team were up for an award at LGC Awards for the best small team, for the amazing work they've done throughout the year, especially in suicide prevention, etc. And I think, although we didn't win the award, to be in, as David said, in the Champions League awards, I think it's worth noting that the great work that he's doing. Thanks very much.
Yeah, absolutely. It's in the UK finalists there. You're doing remarkably well. But just if you could pass that back to the team, David, just with gratitude and, for the hard work. Okay, now going to the next section, which is the cost of living. Joe, back on.
Thank you, Chair. The cost of living section begins at page 46, and I'm very pleased to bring a report on progress here today. The table on page 46 demonstrates spend against the agreed plan over the last few months, and you'll see the large majority of programmes are on track or indeed completed. There have been one or two areas where spend has not been as we'd hoped on track, and such as at section 4 on page 46, where funding has then been reallocated to support areas where more spend can be used effectively. I draw your attention to section 10, where we report that 135 grants have now been paid to community organisations. This is actually an error. We have granted 73 grants. We were very ambitious one day and just added up the last quarter with this quarter instead of seeing that as a cumulative. So total of 73 grants paid out. So in total, in terms of the 2,800,900 pounds allocated, we have spent 2,708,970 pounds. Some highlights that we wanted to draw members' attention to. The first is around the financial inclusion work. You'll remember Council agreed to expand financial inclusion team members into all of our 7 school clusters. All school clusters now have workers in place, and indeed we're currently working on putting a second worker into Robert Burns Academy. The early years support has reaped significant gains. So our early years work so far in terms of financial inclusion has supported 289 families with financial gains for those families of 637,000. The work in the expanded team within the schools has now supported 169 families with financial gains of 165,000. The Citizens Advice Bureau have now set up a helpline that's now operational and in use. The grant awarded to Lemonade of 100,000 has now been fully utilised, supporting people with fuel debt and in providing low energy cooking equipment. At that section, the report notes that a further report will be presented to support, to look at further support for families with regard to school meals and school debt. Since the time of writing, and to ensure we fulfil the intentions of the Council, and through discussions with the Chief Executive, further work is being prepared in this regard, and a report will be brought to the next Cabinet meeting. Of the 73 community grants awarded, these have totalled £300,000 and provide support to community groups with food, fuel and other supplies. We've seen an increase in the number of people uptaking the suicide prevention training as a result of increased funding and expansion of capacity. So again, thanks to David's health and safety team. We increased the target around that training, and we're on track to have achieved 600 people in receipt of the training by the end of the year. The EcoFlex 4 scheme is now operational through the Energy Agency, and applications are being processed. In terms of the food theme, and we're getting near lunchtime, a huge amount of work has been undertaken. Over 4,963 ready meals have been provided at the time in which we wrote the report, and a wide range of food educational programmes have been delivered across the authority, and no doubt you've seen some of those. In terms of business support, 23 businesses have been supported into the energy voucher scheme, and a further 20 are in discussions about joining the scheme. A further 45 businesses have been supported by the community wealth building grants. On page 50, we illustrate the use of our comms campaigns throughout this period. And whilst views of the initial cost of living landing page have reduced, those seeking advice on money and food support continue to be quite high. I'm happy to pause there and take any questions, and indeed we have other colleagues in the room who lead on some of these themes that can offer more detail. I would just alert you also that we're just about to release an elected members briefing on the cost of living work, so there'll be more detail available there. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. It's good to see some of this money going to real good to help people really struggling. Then more so in Lemonade, I was aware that, visited that organisation, and some of the what they're doing to help people that are in fuel poverty is exceptional. One of the things they were doing, they were keeping a tab or a statistic in terms of many people were self-disconnecting, and it was really quite alarming, the statistic. It was just, I wondered if I would be monitoring that just to if the trend's going down, because it really took me by quite surprised, just how many people had no electricity supply in their house.
Thank you. I would imagine that the financial inclusion team do monitor it, but I'm not sure of that. I can check that. It would be useful to tie up that information from Lemonade with our own information to get a more holistic picture. Happy to do that. Thanks. I've come to the end of my report unless there's any other questions. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Joe, for that. Now going to complaints.
That's me, Chair. Too many Joes. Page 52, details information on the complaints for Q4. Notes that 34 complaints were received and 7 carried forward from Q3 too. The paper notes there's been a marked decrease in complaints since 2022-23 compared to previous levels, and of those complaints received, 30 were closed in full, 17 dealt with at stage 1, 7 at stage 2 and 6 were escalated, with 80% of those complaints being responded to at stage 1 within the required timescale. As mentioned previously, and given the work of colleagues in corporate support, we mention as well our complaints procedure, and at the bottom of page 52 we note the learning actions and the improvement actions that we've taken from the complaints that have been sent to us throughout the year, and particularly in Q4. Chair, with your approval, just moving on to risks at page 55. They have been updated, they've been reviewed by the CMT. As I mentioned earlier, one new risk added at 2B. It is amber, it deals with the Ayrshire growth deal. There's been no other risks added to the register, nor have any risks being changed either in RAG status or in terms of any important matters that we'd like to bring out with those that are written in the page. At that point, Chair, and with your approval, I'll stop there and take any questions, noting that in terms of East Ayrshire reforms, if Cabinet is so minded, that the recommendations are at paragraph 3 on page 5. Thank you.
Okay, so just before I go to the recommendations, was there anything on the risks? Just anyone want to comment on? No. Just go straight to recommendations then. Can we agree with the recommendations? Okay, thanks. And now go to the item 4E, which is the Schools and Community Climate Change Fund paper. And James Lally.
Thanks, Chair. This is a paper that seeks Cabinet approval to spend a significant part of the £1 million Climate Change Fund, the 100,000 Community Climate Change Investment Fund, and also the Clean Green Schools Fund. As the report sets out, in relation to the Community Fund, we've identified an opportunity to piggyback onto the Scottish Government's CARES funding. This provides 80% of the costs of upgrading community buildings with energy efficiency measures and with green energy production, so solar panels and things like that. Uptake of this scheme has been fairly limited in East Ayrshire, and I think it's because of that 20% gap. So what we're proposing within the report is a funding package which should bring together support to allow the community groups to get the energy performance certificates that are required to actually access this funding, and then to supplement the funding available from the Scottish Government by 5% from the climate change funding and 5% from our community wealth building funding. That would bring the total funding available up to 90%, and we think that that would be much more attractive and bring in and leverage in significant external funding to decarbonise our community buildings. Recognising the cost of living crisis and the energy prices increase, we're sure that this will not only reduce their carbon emissions, but also help with sustainability of these organisations as they look to reduce their costs of energy bills. The second aspect of the report relates to our education fund, and experience in the first year of this, we had identified that this fund would support the schools themselves in delivering their climate change action funds. But we have now got a principal teacher, part-time principal teacher in place, and my own graduate intern is supporting the schools with their action plans. And we've found that the things that schools are looking for in terms of support, we can provide from either the council's own services like compost and things like that, bins and things, or else we can work with our communities and the private sector. They're really keen to support our schools and their climate change ambitions and bring in the funding required through sponsorship. So what we've also identified an opportunity again to bring in some significant external funding from the Scottish Government and a number of other agencies, which would allow us to fund 70% of the costs of a principal teacher to actually embed climate change and sustainability in our curriculum. We've already seen the significant impact of more boots on the ground supporting our schools, and we have our climate change, our Clean Green Education Awards on Monday, which will show members the fantastic work that is going on in our schools and just show the benefits of that investment. And we feel that this is a really good way to use the remaining funds within the education fund to bring that in and promote the behaviour change and encourage our schools to deliver around their climate change action plans. Happy to take any questions, and we would seek approval of the recommendations as outlined in the report. Thanks.
Thanks, James. That's been really good news that we've managed to bring in that external funding for these projects. And certainly be looking forward to Monday. Graham.
Well, thanks very much for bringing that paper forward, James. I mean, I fully support it. I mean, in both accounts, it's the one with the community buildings and the CARES. I've sat through some of the community groups' AGMs, and by far the biggest expenditure is their energy bills. And I think, as James has already hit on, that extra 20% and the cost of getting that. Sorry, 2 seconds. Yep, sorry. So getting the certificate, the energy certificate, and getting the additional 10% funding that will hopefully bring more community groups forward and make them more sustainable into the future. And the principal teacher side of things, we've already seen the impact that Vicky McWilliams had with the Mission to the Moon. It's an initiative where it's we're asking the young people to either walk, cycle or scoot to school. Now, it's 235,000 miles to the moon, and they've already achieved 219,000 of that, so just a little bit to go. But some of the stats behind that initiative is they've saved about 4,488 gallons of fuel. That's the equivalent of if they'd transported to school. They've climbed Mount Everest 4,725 times and swam 72 lengths of the Nile. So that's an amazing achievement there, young people. And I just thoroughly, hopefully you can recommend the paper. Thanks.
Thanks very much. You know, it's great to see that actual action to tackle climate change for our young people. And that's really pleased to see that, and looking forward to Monday. Drew?
I feel supportive of the paper too, Chair. I've been working with James on a few wee projects, and I think it's great work he's doing there. So totally supportive.
That's true. Okay, can we agree recommendations? Read. Okay, go to the next item, and we'll be doing a comfort break after the next item. We'll get the education items dealt with. So, policy review schedule, Amanda.
Thanks, Chair. The purpose of this report is to recommend to Cabinet proposed changes to employment policies detailed within paragraph 2 and ask Cabinet to note the administrative changes to policies detailed within paragraph 3. The background is laid out in paragraphs 4 through to 6, which are the standard paragraphs. The main report, starting in paragraph 8 through to 14, firstly details 7 policies. There are no significant changes, but each one of these have been through a full review. I would note in particular paragraph 14, the special leave, in addition to the minor administrative change and the move to remove all references to flexi leave and rectify to a flexible working policy. There is additional capacity in there for special leave for an employee who suffers the loss of pregnancy, regardless of the gestation. They'll be entitled to additional special leave, which supports the Miscarriage Association's pregnancy loss pledge. In addition to that, there's also a further provision been noted for employer-supported policing. Paragraph 15 details 12 employment policies which have had administrative changes, mainly due to following the People and Culture Service redesign. These include job titles, equalities mission statement being updated, and the policy review schedule being updated. Below the 12 policies that's listed, there's further 1, 2, 5 other policies that said further minor changes to the ones listed in the table above. And I would just note the early departure policy. There has been just recently a best practice guidance issued by SPDS and COSLA, so that was cross-referenced to our current policy and there was no changes required. The people and culture implications are detailed above. There are also legal implications which are noted, and there are no further implications. The trade unions, paragraphs 23 to 24, have been fully involved and agreed to all the changes. I'd also note in paragraphs 26 to 28, the quality impact assessments. Due to minor changes within the reviews, an EQIA updated was only required for the deployment and career pathways and special leave policies. The recommendations are in paragraphs 2 and 3, and happy to take any questions.
Thanks very much, Amanda. Do we have any questions? Okay, can we agree recommendations? Okay, before I'll call a wee recess for a comfort break. Before I do, just for information, I know the next item's been served as a pink paper, but I have to allow the applicants be notified of the decision, but it'll be held as a white paper, so there'll be open discussion on it. David, do you want to just
Just as you've said, Chair, the need for confidentiality no longer exists because communication's now been sent out to the applicant group. So the concern was simply avoiding them hearing it indirectly once the report was issued. But now that that communication's been issued, then the confidentiality no longer applies. So we wouldn't be inviting committee to consider it under exclusion of present public. We'd be inviting the committee now to consider it without that exclusion.
We'll come back to it, but we'll come back at 12:15. Is that okay? Is that too enough?